The year 2022, you can see it. It's on the horizon. Joining us now, Joel Anand Samy and Natasha Srdoc, co-host of America's Roundtable radio program, and also founders and co-founders of International Leaders Summit. Thanks for joining us today, Joel and Natasha. What's going on up there?
A very good afternoon to you, Gerard, and greetings from Washington, D.C. I wish things could be better here, but we certainly need each and every state and our fellow citizens to advance the changes that we need for our country.
Good afternoon, Gerard, and thank you for having us.
Thanks for coming on, Natasha. Really appreciate you guys joining us. I trust you had a good Christmas, and as we just discussed, we're rolling right in to January, the start of a brand new year, which will also be the year in which the midterm elections will be conducted. I don't think it's looking real well there for the Democrats. Of course, midterms typically see a change of the party in control in the House to revert to the one that is not in the White House. I think at a minimum that's going to occur, but I think there's also a good chance, just kind of sizing up the various Senate races across the country, that stand a good chance due to the Republicans of retaking control of the Senate, which of course is split right down the middle, 50-50 at this point. What do you think?
Well, this is certainly, as you've rightfully mentioned, Gerard, is going to be a crucial year for the future of America. 2022, as you rightfully mentioned, we've got the elections coming up in November. In fact, it does look promising for the Republican side in gaining the House. And as you've mentioned, we shall see what transpires in the Senate. But at the same time, we're noticing a number of individuals actually communicating their intent to resign or not to run for re-election in the days to come. And as we look at the polls, we've also noticed how President Joe Biden's polling from January to now in December 2021 has really gone down dramatically, as well as for the Vice President Kamala Harris. And it is no surprise to anyone with the policies that they have pushed, meaning that policies from the fringes of the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, which are very extreme when one looks at what the Democratic Party used to stand for. When we look at the days of John F. Kennedy, when he reduced taxation to what the party stands for today. So yes, Americans are very disturbed about the high inflation. They are very concerned about how it affects their pocketbook, their family budget. But we also have to be concerned about the national debt now coming closer to $30 trillion, some $228,000 debt per taxpayer.
Yeah, it's interesting you point that out, talking about the economic conditions, inflation, et cetera. We've been talking about that somewhat on the show today. So the Boston Globe, which is certainly not a conservative-leaning publication, they had an analysis yesterday by the Globe staff. James Pendle, a member of the Globe staff, he wrote 9 things we learned about American politics in 2021. Top of the list. Not surprising. It's still about the economy, stupid. And it is. I mean, that seems to be in almost every poll, regardless of political persuasion, that which tops the list of concerns to voters. It's inflation, the cost of fuel, of course, is a big thing that's going on there. The debt, deficits, et cetera. But the Democrats just keep trudging forward with the same old tired agenda of tax and spend.
Right. I mean, it's really unrealistic, as you said, as they can't see what's going on with $29 trillion national debt and $2.8 trillion deficit, having 86,000 per person debt or 270,000 per taxpayer. So every child that is born today in America inherits $87,000 debt. And on top of that, they want to spend more. on social programs. And with their spending so far, they actually caused inflation, which is at 6.8%. So inflation is not showing any sign of being reduced, and they still want to spend more. Meanwhile, I lived in a country where inflation was 1% a day. And you get to know that you have to spend money as fast as possible, because tomorrow everything is going to cost 1% more. In 1 month, it's going to cost 30% more. Can you imagine buying a car today? Or you're going to run to get the car today because you won't be able to afford this same car in 30 days. So we're not there yet, but just to put it in perspective, what does it mean? It's 6.8% is in 40 years, the highest inflation in the United States. So what we have experienced is actually the total reversal of good policies that Trump administration pursued and implemented. And this last year, it's not even 1 year that we had new administration. As some people say, it feels like it has been there for eternity.
Yeah, even Larry Summers from the Obama administration, he rightfully warned about this. I mean, he pegged it, he called it, and he advised against some of these policies that just dropped what I call helicopter money in the country. But they just don't seem to be paying attention to even him at this point. You never hear, this is what you never hear, Joel, coming from the Democrats. We're just going to get out of the way. We're going to cut taxes, deregulate, and let the private sector and the consumers sort this out and find that natural balance. That's what free markets do.
Indeed, Gerard. I was just talking to Natasha earlier on about some of Reagan's great quotes. And one of his quote was, "Government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem." And another great quote is that the most terrifying words in the English language are, "I'm from the government and I'm here to help." And so Ronald Reagan knew it well. He actually left the Democratic Party, joined the Republicans, and stood for free market principles, because it is the free enterprise that fuels economic growth. It's low tax rates that creates the incentive for business to say, I'm going to invest in new equipment or to hire new people rather than paying the government another percentage or 2 or 3% more. And so what we've seen here is that the government needs to get out of the way and allow the people, the American people, to be able to flourish. And what we've seen here in this past year, it's just a reminder of the days of what happened during the Carter administration. I mean, we've not talked about inflation as much as perhaps the earlier generation did in the 1970s, when they were so concerned about runaway inflation. And this is here to stay. And as long as the Democrats talk about more spending, in fact, as we talked about Manchin saying no to the existing bill, that the Build Back Better bill that they were hoping to push forward, now we're hearing Democrat strategists talking about decoupling the bill, putting aside the green energy policies and pushing the social spending bill. Well, that's not going to solve problems. It's going to really create greater problems for us as Americans, for the future, and the national debt, which is a serious problem unless we have a balanced budget in place and to start working to reduce that national debt.
It just doesn't seem like there's any interest whatsoever of even talking about that. I mean, if you think about it, the subject of deficits and debt, as Natasha just pointed out, $2.8 trillion deficit this year. And that's with a typical budget the last 3 or 4 years in the $4 trillion range. So you're talking about a deficit that is more than 50% of sort of baseline spending. And even at $4 trillion, we still produce a $1 trillion deficit. We don't have enough revenue to cover that. We've gotten to a point, Joel, correct me if I'm wrong here, where all of the revenue we collect just barely can cover the mandatory programs. The government's really in the business of health care, insurance, social insurance, welfare redistribution programs, and debt interest. That's about it. That's about all we can afford. If you took the entire amount of defense that we spend on defense out, we still produce a deficit. We've drifted so far away from our fundamental the fundamental role of government. You guys can hang around. I want to hear more from you in another segment. You good?
Yes.
Thank you so much, Gerard.
Gerald.
Absolutely.
Great. Look forward to it, Joel and Natasha. We'll take a break here on Middays. We'll be right back. Back with Joel and Natasha. So, you could say, I guess, that we dodged a little bit of a bullet with Joe Manchin being the dissenting Democrat, and I guess maybe Senator Sinema as well on this Build Back Better bill, which really is the essence of the Biden domestic agenda. But as you said, Joel, it appears now that when they come back, there's going to be an effort to try to break out various provisions and maybe pass them independently and have that scored accordingly and so forth. But one of the things I wanted to get your thoughts on was Manchin, and we just talked about this on the show. He's come out and said he's totally for trying to make some amends with his party, totally for repealing the Trump tax cuts at this point. He thinks that all those cuts went to the rich and the corporations and all that stuff, and they need to be paying their fair share. I get so tired, frankly, of that phrase because it's inaccurate. What do you see happening in your crystal ball there as far as how this may play out in the Senate in 2022?
Well, Gerard, I believe that the Democrats are going to do everything in their power to push to repeal the Trump tax cuts of 2017. And the important issue that we need to keep in mind is that the Democrats, like you've rightfully mentioned, have this narrative that they keep on pushing that the taxation system that we have really gives the rich in this country a free pass. But the truth of the matter is that lowering tax rates creates economic growth. It creates the opportunity for people to save, to invest, to be able to make the decisions on their own. And so the Senate, and also pushed by the Democrats in the House, will definitely work toward some form of a package that pushes a new tax rate. That's something that they've always talked about. Elizabeth Warren on the other side has been a great advocate for increasing tax rates. But I hope and trust that Senator Manchin and Senator Sinema will hold true to the concerns of their own constituents in West Virginia and and Arizona for that matter, because the stakeholders really do not want to see their tax rates go up. It's a punitive tax rate. And on top of that, we're facing an inflation, which is another major cost to families. That's sort of a hidden tax burden that hits Americans at every level. And especially the blue-collar, middle-class workers are the ones that get hit the worst in all of this here.
And the United States, as you guys well know, has the most progressive tax structure in the entire Western world. So this notion that the rich don't pay their fair share, they shoulder more of the burden in this country from just a statistical, mathematical perspective than in any other country. That tax burden is far more evenly distributed in other countries. Of course, they brag about the benefits, but they all pay a whole lot more.
Right. I mean, we have to make a distinction between the rates, official rates, and effective tax rate.
Yes.
And that's where Trump's tax policy initiatives made a progress, basically, because they flattened the rate. What we need to do, and that is actually when we talked at our International Leaders Summit conferences, bring together reformers from different parts of the world, which did implement tax reform. There was a consensus that the tax reform or tax policy the purpose is to collect tax revenues with as high as possible economic growth rate. So if you start with the policy objective, you realize that you have to tax because you need to collect revenue, but you need to get economy going. So the fact is that the lower rates that apply to a larger number of taxpayers or the larger base produces higher tax revenue than progressive taxation. So what we need to do is to lower the taxes to allow economy to grow faster, to get more economic growth, which will automatically get more tax revenues in because the economic activity will be much higher, growth will be higher, there will be more employment, there will be more investment, there will be higher taxes, and it's all a good cycle. Now we're in a vicious cycle of progressively taxation, taxing practically work, capital, taxing employment. So basically, there's less of economic activity and you get less taxation, tax revenue in.
Sure.
And when you mentioned that we have the highest progressive marginal taxation, is actually, it was introduced by Karl Marx, none other than Karl Marx, who actually in his manifesto proclaimed that we need to take from the bourgeois and give to the poor. And he came with the highest progressive tax rates in order to take from the rich and give to the poor. And that's where we actually, yes, that's where we're at now.
Yeah.
Right. So
in this country. So, all right, so now they say, the Democrats do, okay, well, that's kind of over for a while. We're going to pivot to voting rights, and out comes all the hyperbole. The vice president says if we don't pass voting rights legislation, that the United States can no longer be held up as kind of a model democracy for the world. It's just so much rhetoric. It makes you feel, Joel, that there are literally Republicans out there and folks on the right that are physically restraining people from casting a vote. I mean, that's the impression they give you. What's going on here? Is this truly a problem? I can't find it.
Well, it's something that we have known from a very long period of time, that the Democrat progressive fringe really wants to remove any kind of a measure that will preserve the sanctity of the ballot, and where they will say, let's not even have a voter ID. Well, we remember what happened in Atlanta when Coca-Cola said, listen, we're going to support the Black Lives Matter movement and their opposition to this very important bill. These restrictions on voter ID are so important. But when they had their own shareholders gathering in Atlanta, they asked for having a ID before you could get into the shareholders meeting. And so to weaken those important measures really doesn't do anyone any good. We really need to strengthen the measures that give the trust to the electorate that says my vote counts, and there is no room for mischief for people to come into a voting booth without an ID and casting votes. I mean, we see what's happening in New York, where there is a push for individuals that are not citizens to vote in our country. So are we going to open it up for tourists to come from around the world and vote in our elections? That just doesn't make sense. So I think that the great majority of Americans from the minority communities and other communities are saying, listen, we believe in having a voter ID. We believe in having strict measures that protect our ballot. And I think that's what we need to focus on. I think the center-right Republican leaders and those in states need to do a better job in explaining what election integrity is all about. It's not about stopping a group of people from voting. It's about making sure that each vote is counted and that we have that sanctity of the ballot ensured, and individuals can work toward the fact that who they vote for, the consent of the governed, that all applies.
Well, to your point there, go ahead, Natasha, please.
Yeah, right. I wanted to add to this, actually, that with this voter rights bill, Democrats actually want to prevent finding about things that happen, like, for example, 20,000 dead voters in Pennsylvania that introduced mail-in ballots for all voters on the voting list. So all 20,000 dead voters could have voted in the last presidential election. Then lastly, 20,000, also number 20,000 voters, dead voters, they actually came up with a photographing tombs of those voters in Michigan that also could have voted because of universal mail-in ballots that were introduced just before pandemic. And also to share another important thing that Dr. Victor Hansen shared with us was that in 2016, we had the highest record high, actually, mail-in ballots at 40% of all ballots that were actually casted, of all votes that were casted, 40%. In 2020, we had a new record high of 60%. In the meantime, the statistical error rate dropped from 3% to 0.3%, which means that we could have discarded some 7 million voters. So 7 million votes.
Unbelievable.
So if we want to hush these things, then we need to vote for new voter bill.
I just, we got to go here, but I just wish they'd be honest about that. Bring forward some people who are saying, yeah, I'm absolutely unable to vote, before you start proclaiming that people can't vote, because that's what they're saying and why they say they need this legislation. Just bring some people up and say, yeah, I tried to vote. They wouldn't let me. It's pretty simple. Just got to tell the truth. That's all we need. Joel and Natasha,
Absolutely.
always a pleasure having you guys on the program. I wish you the healthiest and happiest of New Year's, and I look forward to talking to you soon. God bless, my friend.
Happy New Year
best
to
in New
Gerard.
Year.
Happy New Year. Blessings to you all.
Thank you, Jared.
Thank you, guys. We'll talk soon. Middays, we'll take a break. We'll come right